Hello and welcome to Noble Mind.
Noble Mind is a podcast exploring mindfulness, meditation, and psychology.
Hello, Noble Mind listeners. In this episode, we spoke to Dr. Melissa Day about using mindfulness-based interventions to help with physical pain. She discusses the neurological roots of pain and research that suggests how mindfulness interventions can help rewire the brain and reduce pain over time.
Dr. Melissa Day completed her MA and PhD in clinical health psychology and postdoctoral research fellowship in pain psychology at the University of Washington. She is now an endorsed clinical psychologist and health psychologist in Australia and works as an associate professor in the School of Psychology at the University of Queensland. Dr. Day's research has focused on implementing randomized controlled trials to evaluate the efficacy and mechanisms of cognitive behavioral and mindfulness-based interventions for pain. She recently published a sole-authored book with Wiley titled Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy for Chronic Pain, a Clinical Manual and Guide.
As always, we would love to stay in touch, so head on over to noblemindpodcast.com where you can join our email list, send us a message and tell us how we're doing, and as always, get our episode's show notes. Enjoy the episode. So we're here with Melissa Day. Welcome to Noble Mind. Thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, delighted.
We thought maybe we just get started by having you say hello to our listeners and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're all about.
Sure, yeah. So my name's Mel Day and I'm a licensed clinical and health psychologist here in Australia and also an associate professor at the University of Queensland here in Brisbane. And my research is mostly in the area of chronic pain management, and I've done a work with mostly mindfulness-based cognitive therapy and mindfulness meditation approaches, as well as cognitive behavioral therapy approaches. And also with one of my collaborators at University of Washington, Mark Jensen, we've done a lot with hypnosis as well, actually. So we've compared quite a few different treatments, but that's my main area of interest, and of course get to teach and supervise and train the next generation of psychologists too, which I really enjoy.
What do you find is most misunderstood about mindfulness by the general public?
That's a really good question. I would say perhaps what I find when I'm delivering these interventions from people are new coming in, people seem to think that when they practice meditation, their mind will just go nice and quiet and they'll be able to sit here, like all of the Buddha statues, so calm, so centered. And then they start practicing and they realize, monkey mind, their mind is going all over the place. And people interpret that as, oh my goodness, I'm a bad meditator. I can't do this. This is not the way it's supposed to be. When in actuality, that's just part of practice. That's mindfulness in and of itself, is actually just noticing when your mind is going all over the place like that, noticing when there's moments of stillness. But I'd say that's perhaps the biggest misperception, is that we're going to have this nice, quiet, calm mind when we practice meditation. And that may or may not happen, but either way, it's not a problem.
Yeah, those statues look so serene on the outside. If only we could see what was going on in their heads.
No, they're mind planning, thinking, constantly remembering, emotions coming and going. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? That we see pictures like that, we see images, we see statues, and so I would say that's perhaps the biggest thing that people come into my treatment programs with that to understand.
People don't realize that until if they do tens of thousands of hours of meditation, it's actually not possible for their mind to stay on the object anyway. So it's all about returning.
Precisely. And training in just noticing when our mind does that. And I think after we get to, 10,000 hours of practice, that golden number, whatever it happens to be, is that we notice and we catch ourselves earlier and earlier and earlier. So instead of it running off in this whole big storyline with emotions going along with it, this really hooked quality. We notice when we're going down that pathway earlier and earlier, and of course it's much easier to bring it back the earlier we catch it.
Yeah, I think some of the benefits I noticed initially, some of the earlier benefits might have just been just slowing down a little bit, right? Like it's still the same thoughts, but they're a little slower or a little bit less pressured or less emotional, or like I'm less totally sucked in 100% or something like that. I think, and then probably also I think some of the initial benefits that I might have noticed might have just been kind of in just the sort of perseverance and doing something that's challenging, and whether it's meditation or anything else, just that sort of the benefit of being like, hey, I'm committed to this or dedicated to this, or and sort of feeling like a boost from that as well.
And I think not underestimating just the idea of doing something for ourselves, something for self-care, and instead of it being on the to-do list, but only after I do everything else. I think when you start a meditation practice and you commit to it, and you say, I'm going to get up that half hour earlier or whatever it happens to be, there's something powerful, I think, just in just that self-care, that compassion towards ourselves, in taking that time.
Yeah, that's true. I'm thinking on days when I'm running off to get somewhere and I just get like 5 minutes in or something because I have to get to like an obscenely early meeting or something. And surely those 5 minutes aren't going to like make or break my enlightenment. But as a ritual, as you're saying, as a self-care sort of intention, it does matter to just take those few minutes, because it does something about showing my priorities in some way.
Yep. And showing that bit of kindness towards yourself, and just taking that time. And I do find it kind of does give you a different mental set going into your day when you do that, even if it is just 5 minutes. It just kind of hits that reset, hits that pause button, gives that little perspective.
You're the author of Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy for Chronic Pain, and also the program that is based on.
Yes. So that approach, actually I started that book and that approach and the research that's behind that book, the clinical trials, actually back in the day when I was a PhD student, and we did some of the initial trials with headache and migraine, tension type headache, and we found really good results there. We expanded it to low back pain as well, and there was more and more interest at that point from researchers internationally, people wanting the treatment protocol. So I thought, why not just get it out to people? Put all this work into developing this treatment approach. It's adapted from Seeger-Williams and Teasdale's Mindfulness-Based Cognitive Therapy, originally for depression relapse, but now for depression as well. So it's adapted from that protocol and adjusted and tailored specifically for pain. And so the book was an easy way. It wasn't easy. It took a lot more work, much more work than I thought. And it was a way to get it out to people. So the book has all of the manuals, the therapist manuals, patient workbooks to go along with it, all of the guided audios with meditations. And it's in, I think, over 600 libraries now worldwide. So there has been quite a bit of uptake, and I'm hoping it's in correctional service facilities now that people are able to deliver this approach for pain. So writing a book is one way to just get a protocol and a treatment out to people to use.
I was struck by your degree of compassion. You talk about how chronic pain is an invisible killer.
Yes.
And perhaps many treaters may not perhaps appreciate the multiple domains. Could you say a few things about that, and what can be seen from the outside, level of pain, the compounding of the invisibility?
Yeah. I think this is a big one for a lot of people living with chronic pain, because there's no blood test at this point in time that can measure how much pain people are in. We can't necessarily see arthritis from the outside. We can't see a bulging disc, or we can't see fibromyalgia. We can't see headaches. And so to a person, when you're looking at them from the outside, they look fine. And so it's invisible in the sense that, if somebody asks, how are you, and you have chronic pain, it's a difficult question to answer. It's sort of like, do you say the truth and you look, geez, they're in misery guts, all they say is that they're in pain all the time? Or do you just sort of say, oh, I'm fine, because you don't want to go there? So even just simple questions like that become difficult to navigate. And so it's invisible from the outside, and it makes it challenging. And a lot of people, because of that, do tend to withdraw. They do tend to isolate as well. And one of the things with chronic pain is that also it has very high rates of comorbid depression, anxiety, insomnia, those types of concerns as well, and high rates of suicide, unfortunately. And so in that case, it's invisible, and it becomes an invisible killer to, unfortunately, quite a substantial percentage of people that live with chronic pain.
And you're right that chronic pain, people feel isolated, misunderstood, they see no way out. So there's a sense of lack of self-efficacy and agency.
Yeah, and it's one of those things too, a lot of people with chronic pain, they get stuck in a biomedical model of treatment, in a sense, and it's only natural, right? When we're kids, we break a bone, we go to the doctors, they do an x-ray, they put a cast on. After 6 weeks, the broken bone is better, we go on our way. So a biomedical model works very, very well for acute injuries, acute pain. But once you start getting chronic pain, when the pain persists beyond, so chronic pain is pain that is defined as pain that persists beyond the normal or expected healing time. That definition is a little problematic. Like, what's the normal expected healing time for arthritis? But it's a general definition. And then the other one is pain that persists beyond 6 months and is experienced most of the time. And so once you get into that scenario, and it's not a broken bone, so the medical model, if you can't find it, you can't diagnose it, you can't fix it, you can't surgically operate, then it becomes this palliative approach. And unfortunately, that has contributed to, which you're probably well aware of, an opioid epidemic. And the concern is that people are not necessarily given other options, that there's not access to non-pharmacological interventions, that they're not in our mainstream healthcare. And chronic pain is inherently a biopsychosocial condition. It's not it's not a one-to-one relationship about how much tissue damage you have and how much pain you feel. When you have chronic pain, actually it shifts the way your brain begins to process pain. So it's no longer just about tissue damage. When pain persists, it's actually rewiring your whole central nervous system, and it's rewiring your brain as well.
I'm wondering, at least in the U.S., there's a tendency, I think, for people to maybe go in circles sometimes looking for biomedical interventions, finding interventions that don't help, or not being offered interventions. And for various reasons, people end up in a psychologist's office or a therapist's office. Mm-hmm. And what I've experienced as the clinician in those encounters is that there's a feeling that they've been sent there because their doctors think it's in their head, and so there's understandably, some discontent, kind of coming in, feeling like the doctor's given up on me. They've just sent me to a shrink or something like that. So I suspect you've had similar experiences, if it's like that at all in Australia. And I wonder, how do you sort of work with that and then kind of help explore how something like a mindfulness or a cognitive intervention might be helpful for people who, may be feeling really failed by the healthcare system?
Yeah, it's true. And through no fault of their own, a lot of people do get stuck on a medical merry-go-round, going from test to test. Unfortunately, for some people, failed surgeries that really weren't appropriate to begin with. Then there's the recovery from that, the scar tissue from that. Then there's all of the medications that may have failed. People come in with a whole bag of medications. By the time they get to me, they have a medical chart about this thick. And unfortunately, in the current system, they're really not referred to somebody like a psychologist until everything else fails. Like people come to me and they say, well, I've got nothing to lose. I've tried everything else. And I think that's the critical piece that we need to shift, because if we could get those people sooner, when it's chronic pain, it starts with chronic pain, but then once it persists like this and it's not effectively treated, then you start getting employment problems on top of it, so they can't work anymore. That causes strain in terms of socioeconomic strain. It causes strain on relationships. It causes strain on relationships with kids. So all of a sudden, chronic pain becomes loaded up into this much heavier, bigger problem to deal with. Whereas if they came in just when it's like this, that's much more workable. But part of the process then is letting go of the extra baggage, so letting go of the anger, the depression, working with the sleep problems. So you're letting go of that extra baggage to lighten the load of living with chronic pain. Mindfulness doesn't cure pain. It's certainly not, it's not a magical cure, but it allows you to let go of that extra baggage that loads up pain, increases how much pain you feel, and with that allows you to put all of the energy that all of that is sucking to actually then use that energy to move in a direction that you choose, that's of meaning and value. So unfortunately, yes, they do often tend to come to a psychologist like us once there's that accumulative piece of living with chronic pain, which is natural. And unfortunately, when surgeries don't work, medications don't work, they end up getting told, oh, well, you're just stressed, or, oh, it's in your head, you should go to a psychologist, because if it was real, all of these interventions would have worked, basically. So then the patient feels like they're the failure, they're the problem. And so that is challenging, in terms of you've got all of that to work with as soon as the person enters your clinic. And the idea too is that they don't necessarily see psychological treatments, mindfulness meditation, these approaches, they see it as fluff, for lack of a better word. They don't realize that this is a treatment that is effective for real pain, that they are here, this treatment is not for malingering, that this is a treatment that has been shown to work for real, genuine chronic pain conditions, that what we do here actually retrains your brain to process the pain in a different way. And so part of what we do in our first session is actually provide that neurological rationale for why these non-pharmacological treatments do actually work at a neurological level to improve pain over time.
I'd love to hear a little more about that.
Yeah, so when people generally come into the office in that first session, it is important to get that buy-in. And so generally what we'll do, which is also in my book in terms of the handouts that go along with this for clients, if you're interested in that, is actually describe how, go through a little bit of overview of how, we used to have this biomedical perspective and how really there's just accumulative evidence that that is not an accurate account for chronic pain. You would give examples, about wounded soldiers, on the battlefield, Henry Beecher, like that first experience of when it was documented that it's not a one-to-one relationship. In that scenario, Beecher noticed, this was in World War II, that he would have soldiers with really painful injuries and civilians with the same injuries, so wounds to the stomach, gunshot wounds to the stomach, lost limbs, and Beecher was the first to notice that the soldiers were actually requesting less medication with the civilians. And that was because for the soldiers, this was their ticket home. This was their ticket out of there. Whereas for the civilians, this injury meant going back to their war-torn homeland with a loss of wages. And so it was that difference in the meaning of the pain that actually was contributing to the amount of pain experienced. So that was the very first documented example of how we think about pain impacts how much pain we feel. Building on that, now we have tremendous technological advances. We now have MRI, we now have brain imaging, we now have EEG. And with that, we now have new understandings that when we experience pain, so if you're in an MRI machine and somebody zapped you with like a pain stimulus, it's not just this pain center of the brain that lights up. It's the somatosensory cortex, but it's also the emotion center of the brain. So it's also the amygdala. It's also the prefrontal cortex of the brain. So it's also that thinking area. All of these regions are lighting up. So it's this interconnected network. And over time, what happens with our brain is that All of that is so interconnected, and it rewires itself that those connections, when pain ramps up, all of that system ramps up. And so you can begin to see that when you can shift any piece of that system, since it's so interconnected, that actually is a feedback loop that actually can also change how much pain we feel. So our brain is filtering these pain signals from our body, and our brain, depending on whether the emotion center is ramped up, thoughts are ramped up, catastrophizing, anger, depression, all of those things ramp up pain processing in the brain. But we can also turn down the volume on pain that can actually have this descending or modulatory effect. And we know that with mindfulness in particular, that is an approach that can turn down the volume of pain. But clients themselves, they're the experts on their pain. When you do this discussion, you'll say, what have you noticed makes your pain worse? What have you noticed makes your pain better? And they will be able to provide a number of different examples because they notice. And then you can connect that back to this neurological rationale. And the idea is then with treatment, we are actually shifting real pain, because pain is not experienced until those signals get to the brain. And so then if you shift that network, you're actually shifting your perception of pain. And this too is when we talk about central sensitization that happens with pain, which is how your brain rewires itself. You need fewer pain signals to experience, the same amount of pain. You can actually make that plasticity work for you rather than against you. So with mindfulness training, you're actually retraining the brain. We know that you're laying down new neural pathways, that you're actually shifting brain volume, studies have shown. And so then you're actually, though, instead of it being maladaptive with central sensitization, you're using those same processes of plasticity to turn down the volume of pain. And we know that's the case because when we've trained people with meditation in terms of pathways for improving pain, what researchers have found is that there's this decoupling of pain centers and emotion centers and that prefrontal, that thinking center of the brain, so that you're just noticing pain without that alarm bells, reaction, danger, harm signal going off. And so that decoupling of our thoughts and emotions in response to pain and that quietening of the brain actually has been shown to be a key mechanism underlying how mindfulness is effective for reducing pain.
So there's, just to sort of put the pieces together, it sounds like there's the part of the brain that activates, that just sort of registers the sensory information, like, incoming from the lower back or whatever. And then there's an emotion part that's sort of surging, like, I don't like this, ouch, whatever. I mean, not in words, but just that sort of intense emotional reaction. And also the thinking mind is like trying to make sense of it or name it or whatever. And I imagine you get caught up in loops there where you sort of just decide it's pain, decide it's very bad pain, and then that's scary. And so then your emotions get wound up, and then being in a lot of distress escalates the whole spiral. Am I onto it?
Yeah, yes.
I think I've had this experience before.
Yeah, I think most of us know how we can kind of get ourselves revved up. But so the thalamus really is that relay station that sends signals throughout all of the brain. And so that thalamus is sort of a gating mechanism as well. Some research from Fidel Fadan's group has found too. But yes, and then, that old Hebbian learning principle, what fires together wires together, and these connections get stronger and stronger. And so, yes, once you start getting that reaction to pain, this is dangerous, this is harm, this is awful, it's terrible, anxiety is ramping up, pain starts ramping up, then all of those neural connections start firing together, and then they start wiring together. And then that is you can have that same scared reaction, which then also ramps up the pain reaction. So then the pain center of the brain. And so that's how it's no longer necessarily the pain signals itself ramping up the brain, but it can be all of those interconnected neurological nodules that can ramp up pain as well.
Mm-hmm.
You've also studied what the treatment mediators may be and sort of overarching frameworks, how this may be actually working.
Yes. So that's key interest to me is to identify how our different treatments work. Because if different treatments work via different pathways, it also means that different individuals can benefit from different treatments. So it's a little bit like when we have a menu of options with antidepressants. You know, we have a variety of different types in order to find the one class of medication that works for a given individual. It's a bit like that with our psychological treatments, that they have different mechanisms of action. And when we can understand how these different treatments work, then we can better know which treatment is right for which person. And so we've done trials but this is why we compare different treatments in our clinical trials as well, to be able to see how they work differently. And so we just completed a chronic low back pain trial. Chronic low back pain is actually the most common type of chronic pain, followed closely by headache as well. But this study was in low back pain, and we compared 8-week treatments. So they're 8-week treatments. They meet once a week with me for 8 weeks for 2 hours each session, and then they have a bunch of homework or take-home activities in between that they do. And in that study, we compared mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. I can tell you more about what that entails if you would like me to. And then mindfulness meditation, so just a pure mindfulness meditation condition, and then a pure cognitive therapy condition. Would you like me to tell you a little bit about those 3 treatments?
I'd love to, yeah.
So I'll start with cognitive therapy. So cognitive therapy has been around for a long, long time, since the 80s. It's often combined with cognitive and behavioral techniques. Cognitive just means thinking, it's thoughts. And so with cognitive therapy, really what you're aiming to do is to identify this connection between stress and pain. Living with chronic pain is stressful. Stress makes pain worse. And along with that, typically when we're upset, thoughts go closely along with it. And our thinking patterns tend to drive our emotions. And they also have a key influence over how much pain we feel. And, and we're thinking all the time. It's a running stream of commentary. And generally this is quite helpful for us. It allows us to navigate our world. It allows us to think on our feet, to respond to stimuli. But when we're stressed, when we're living with chronic pain, what tends to happen is our thoughts can become overly negative. They can become overly harsh towards ourselves, or they can be kind of black and white. It has to be this way or that way. And we have all of these different patterns of unhelpful thoughts, but we don't typically notice that, and we don't notice how that impacts our pain. So the idea with cognitive therapy is first to enhance our awareness of what we are telling ourselves, and to realize where it may or may not be completely true, and to restructure those cognitions to actually make them more adaptive, more helpful, kinder towards ourselves, and to lower that stress response, to reduce that sympathetic nervous system activity in order to improve pain. And it's been shown to be very, very effective. My PhD mentor, Professor Beverly Thorne, she wrote the book on cognitive therapy. So I was very fortunate, wrote the book on cognitive therapy for pain. So I was actually trained under her. She's a delightful person, and her approach has a great deal of evidence. And then there's the mindfulness meditation piece, which of course Kabat-Zinn pioneered for health conditions. And so the idea there again is to train the mind to respond to pain in a different way, to engage in that non-judgmental awareness of pain without the alarm bells going off in response to it, without those thoughts getting carried away along with those pain signals. So you're decoupling those areas of the brain so that, yes, the pain is still there, but you're not ramping it up, with the amygdala, the thought center, like we talked about earlier. And then mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, the reason that I was drawn to that is it amalgamates, it kind of integrates the best of both of those approaches, in my view. And so the idea is that it integrates the mindfulness meditation training and techniques that was pioneered by Jon Kabat-Zinn, and then it integrates that with these cognitive therapy and behavioral exercises to basically allow people to enhance awareness of their thoughts, to enhance awareness of how they're responding to pain, so that then they can train in meditation to let those unhelpful habits of mind or unhelpful habits of behavior go. And then also to notice pleasant experiences. in our day, because oftentimes chronic pain just puts the blinders on and all we see is pain. All we have our attention on is pain. And so the idea with the cognitive behavioral exercises is it sort of removes the blinders so that you can just notice and enjoy those pleasant moments in our day and also schedule them in. So that's another piece in MBCT as well, is to schedule in moments in our day that top up our resources. Chronic pain sucks our resources, and if we don't actually schedule things in to top them up, we end up getting really depleted by the end of the day. So the idea is to notice what we're doing and then to schedule in little resource top-ups along the way. One of my patients called it, I love this, he called his little 3-minute breathing space, which one of the exercises, he called it his mindfulness pit stop, where he pulls over, tops up, and then, keeps going about his day. So in our recent trial, we compared those 3 interventions. Yeah.
Or the outcome.
Yeah. It is one of those findings that when you compare 2 or more active treatments, you tend to find more similarities than differences in outcomes. You probably heard of this. It's called the dodo bird verdict from Alice in Wonderland. All shall win, all shall have prizes, because tends to be that if you compare evidence-based treatments, they're effective. That's why they're evidence-based. We expected that. And so that's generally what we were more interested in, the pathways to benefit. But we did, at the end of the 8-week program, we found significant large effect size reductions in pain intensity, pain interference, depression, and physical function improved. And then at the 6-month follow-up, we followed up with people 6 months after they finished treatment. Because these programs, they're skills building. They are training you in a pain management toolkit that once treatment ends, you can use it for the rest of your life. So we wanted to follow up 6 months after people. And generally the benefit was maintained at 6 months. And actually at that 6-month mark, we did find that mindfulness-based cognitive therapy actually outperformed just mindfulness meditation alone. So at 6 months follow-up, MBCT had significantly larger reductions in interference and depression and significantly higher improvements in physical function. So that was interesting. So there's something about the combined approach of the mindfulness and cognitive therapy piece that was allowing people to maintain their benefits out to 6-month follow-up for much longer.
And did it do better than both mindfulness alone and cognitive therapy alone?
Not compared to cognitive therapy, no. We found this weird thing, and we've got another trial going on now to try to get to the bottom of it. But actually, because we did a 3-month follow-up assessment as well, and weirdly, the cognitive therapy group, they were tracking along really well out to 3-month follow-up, but then they had a rebound. They relapsed, and they actually got worse between the 3 to 6 months. They were still better than what they started with, so they had still improved. Yeah, there was this rebound effect at that 3-month mark, whereas in mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, the trajectory just kept getting better. So I'm not sure. It's possible that people got bored with doing the cognitive therapy. It's possible because it's a lot of worksheets, and people, I think, tend to think with the worksheets, I don't really need to do the worksheet because I can just do it in my head now. But it doesn't quite work that way. Like, there's something about getting your thoughts down on paper that allows you to get that distance and that perspective. That's my hunch. I don't know because we didn't collect the data, but we are running a trial now that specifically looks at why do some people relapse? Why do some people actually continue to get better? And why do some people plateau? And so we're doing research at the moment to explore that too, because ideally when you do an 8-week treatment, these are, like I said before, they're skills building pain management approaches, that they build that sense of self-efficacy, that there's something I myself can do to manage my pain, which is quite powerful.
So in your writing, I've noticed terms pop up like acceptance, catastrophizing, self-efficacy.
Mm-hmm.
How would you describe your understanding of what happens with chronic pain, untreated and treated, in terms of those concepts?
That's a really, really good question. And those terms that you were just throwing around, so like acceptance, catastrophizing, mindfulness, self-efficacy, those were actually therapeutic processes that we thought might underlie the changes in outcome, that actually if you harness those processes, you will get improved outcome. So our treatments are designed to kind of tap into changing those processes that you just described. And specifically, pain catastrophizing is basically it's a negative mental set about real or anticipated pain. So it has this hypervigilant attentional quality, which is evolutionary beneficial, actually. If you're in pain, pain demands attention because you want to know what's happened to my body. How do I deal with it? That's beneficial in the short term, but over time, when that chronic pain persists, that process of focusing on the pain, that hypervigilant attention keeps you locked on the pain, and that's an aspect of catastrophizing. So then it has that magnification quality of focusing on the pain, which ramps it up. And then it's along with that also with catastrophizing are thoughts like, this is terrible, it's awful, it's ruined my life, this is never going to get any better, I'm not the person I was anymore, I'm half the person I was, I'm damaged goods. All of these thoughts, that's all pain catastrophizing, which ramps up pain processing in the brain. Whereas things like, to counteract that, if we shift to self-efficacy, that's that belief that, yes, pain is here and there's something that I can do about it. So when we're talking about self-efficacy can be a number of different things, but when in the context of pain management, it's the belief that I can manage my pain, I'm in control of my pain, I can do something about this, I can make this pain better, I can handle it. So you can see, if you contrast catastrophizing and self-efficacy, they're almost opposite sides of the same coin. They're not quite, because they're different variables, constructs, but they do tend to counteract each other. And self-efficacy is very powerful, particularly when people have been on that medical merry-go-round. They feel like hopeless. They feel like everything they've tried to do hasn't worked, that they don't know where to turn anymore, that they've tried everything. They come to us and they say, I've got nothing to lose because I've tried everything. When you give them something that works, not that you give them, you train them that they themselves then have a skill set that they can use. It's theirs. They own it. That's quite powerful to those people. And then there's that aspect of acceptance and mindfulness, which is quite paradoxical, because mindfulness is all about letting go of the need for control, right? So it's quite interesting when you contrast that to self-efficacy, where self-efficacy is all about, I'm in control of this, I can manage. And then if you have mindfulness, it's all about letting go and just noticing things and letting things be as they are. Interestingly, what we are finding is that when people are able to just notice the pain, let it be as it is, allow it to be there, give it space, in letting go of the need for control, they actually gain a sense of control. So it's quite interesting.
So it's secretly just another control tactic. I was actually just thinking about in ACT about psychological flexibility too. That's just a big thing there about how that makes total sense, that it's the ability to let go at times and then take effective action at times. It's not all one or all the other, but being able to do both of those things, among others, that gives you a sense of being able to handle it.
That's it. And to recognize in what context the wise action that's required in that particular context, which can be different depending on those contextual factors. But that's, a perfect example of that too.
Is the subjective experience of physical pain different? Sort of setting the second arrow aside, is the first arrow less painful as a result of approaching it differently?
So I think you're talking about the first arrow, which is the physical pain, and then the second arrow is our reaction to that. Yes. So I just wanted to clarify that in case other people weren't familiar with that metaphor. So it's interesting in the sense that I would say the first arrow has an evolutionarily adaptive purpose. People that can't feel pain, they tend to, they'll put their hand on a hot stove and not even realize it's painful. So they tend to actually die young. So it's a genetic condition that actually some people don't feel pain. So there is an adaptive purpose to feeling pain. That becomes less adaptive when pain persists and becomes chronic, because it's no longer necessarily a sign that damage is being done. But then it's all about, you're exactly right, what happens next? How do we respond to that? And so that's that second arrow of, do we notice that? Do we take wise action? Or what do we do? What's our own particular flavor of response? And frankly, I think it's quite natural that if pain persists, people would see a doctor, that people would get scans, that people would try different ways to approach it. People would try physical therapy. There's nothing wrong with that. That's all completely understandable. And yet with our healthcare system, we are still in this mind-body dualism, that it's all about taking care of the body and not about the mind. And the mind is just as important to be cultivating and training, even while you're doing all of those things. Go get your tests, go get everything else. And in the meantime, we can still be working with this response to pain, because what researchers have actually shown, some people are looking at that transition of what predicts the transition from acute pain to chronic pain. Mm-hmm. Actually, one of the most powerful predictors, looking at all else combined, they've done MRI studies, they've done neurotransmitters, all of this stuff, is emotional reactivity in the brain. Mm-hmm. Emotional reactivity to that inciting painful event, it is that reaction that is actually one of the strongest predictors of who goes on to experience chronic pain. So that right there, that we've got a neurological rationale for not just looking after the body at a point of injury, but looking after that mind-body connection in a holistic way. So rather than coming to a psychologist, 10 years later when everything else has failed, working with people at that point can have preventative benefit even, perhaps.
I was just thinking about examples of even just going through a lot of scary tests, right? Getting a test result back and then having to go in for follow-up and all the uncertainty that goes along with that. That can be so extremely stressful. And then whether or not you even get diagnosed with anything or need further treatment, even just having help and support in how you navigate just the very beginnings of dealing with a potential health issue can make such a difference in the long run. But again, so often people aren't sent that way or don't think to self-refer.
Or don't have access. It might be money, it might be the hospital understaffed if you're in a rural area. There's a lot of barriers to overcome, but you're exactly right. For some people, actually seeing the image of a spinal abnormality is not a good thing, because now they have that image implanted in their mind, and that's what they see, and they then interpret and they think, my spine is crumbling. I actually had a patient that said that. That was his thought. He actually, because he had seen that MRI, that image of the little gaps between, like the disc compressing. He's like, my spine's crumbling, and that's how he interpreted that image. Can you talk about turning up your brain, ramping up with that going through your head?
Well, the shift in how one relates to experience parallels a neurological shift in the way the brain works, and you can see this in scans.
Precisely. Yeah. And I should say too, even though people get MRI imaging, it's helpful, but it's not the holy grail actually, because there's been plenty of studies, really eloquent studies that have been done that have compared spinal MRIs of people that report pain, that report chronic pain, so they report back pain, versus people who say, no, I don't have any pain. So they've done MRI scans, and actually spinal abnormalities, there were equal number of abnormalities in both groups. And those bulging discs and things actually didn't predict who had pain very well. But yet we intervene on those spinal abnormalities, even though it might not be the cause of pain. And then people see those images, and that's what they think, that's causing my pain. So MRIs aren't perfect. They're a useful tool, but it shouldn't be that you have pain if you've got an abnormality. It's in your head if you don't have that.
Yeah.
Would you like to walk us through the sessions of the MBCT for chronic pain protocol?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So with the mindfulness-based cognitive therapy approach, since it has been adapted for chronic pain, coming back to what I was describing earlier, is it's really important in that session one that you provide that neurological rationale for why mindfulness and these cognitive therapy, these non-pharmacological interventions are effective for real pain. And so we go over that psychoeducation content to really get that buy-in, because unless people have a reason, why am I doing this? Unless they know, why am I doing this for my pain? They're not going to do it. It's human nature that we have to have a reason for engaging in a behavioral change. And starting your mindfulness practice is a massive behavioral change. It requires a lot of motivation and commitment to dedicate yourself to that. So that psychoeducation up front is really important. And then, much like Kabat-Zinn's approach then, is to introduce the idea of automatic pilot and how we're often not aware of our thinking patterns, and then connecting that back into how that influences pain in the brain. So you keep connecting this back all throughout the program. And then teaching as well, because with MBCT, it's taught in a secular context, is that there's nothing mystical or magical about mindfulness, that it's just bringing this quality of attention to what we're doing in the moment. And so doing a raisin exercise, or we call them sultanas here in Australia, so that mindful eating practice, so that you can just see that just by bringing this mindful quality of attention, that it actually shifts our experience. And people notice that quite readily when they have that mindful eating exercise in session. And then building on from that, then we teach in our first session a body scan meditation practice. So that's that first formal meditation. And the idea then with the home practice is they're practicing both informal and formal mindfulness practices, and also the cognitive exercises as well. Building on from that, we go into, in session 2, they again do that body scan practice, because the body's quite tangible. It's here, we can feel it, we can see it. So it's an easy, I will use that term too lightly. It's an anchor to the present that's more readily accessible to people. And so if people, when they come in, if they haven't had experience with meditation, it's a way to introduce to the practice. And particularly for pain, it's useful because usually people focus on the part of the body that has a problem with it, so to speak, that has pain. And so with the body scan, you're learning to move your attention around each part of the body in turn. Then when you get to that area that's painful, to train your mind to go beyond that label, to experience the quality of the sensation, so that then you're reversing that habitual way of pushing pain away, don't want to go there, don't want it, want to avoid it. You're reversing that habitual reaction by bringing that curiosity to it. And then with the body scan, you're training in doing that. And then when I choose, I'm moving my attention elsewhere, that I'm going to then proceed with the body scan. So instead of pain hijacking your attention, which is what typically happens, you yourself begin to train your mind to intentionally notice, going beyond labels, and then you intentionally choose when you want to redirect your attention elsewhere. So it has important implications for pain management, and that's what we discuss. There's a guided inquiry after each of the practices, and that's when you really highlight why this practice is important for pain in particular. So that's a critical part of the treatment, is that guided inquiry. And then we build on from that. So the object of meditation becomes increasingly less tangible throughout the 8-week program. So we go to move awareness of the breath and the body in session 3, awareness of breath, body, sounds and thoughts in session 4, then awareness of breath, body, sounds and thoughts, and intentionally bringing a difficulty into the practice, and actually working with that difficulty through the body, which is a challenging practice but very powerful. And then we also have mindful movement and mindful walking as well throughout the program. Unlike MBSR, where there's yoga poses and postures, with chronic pain, I'm not a certified yoga instructor, and you can actually do damage. You know, if you have people in triangle pose, for example, and they have a spinal issue, that could end quite badly, and you could actually cause more harm than good. So in our mindful movement, in the MBCT approach, it's more just getting people to explore the edges of pain. So instead of them saying, can't do that movement, you're just noticing contrasts in the body. So like something as simple as, just raising your arm out to the side, you can begin to notice the difference between tension and relaxation. You can begin to notice when the muscles start to get warm, and then you can notice what happens when you just slowly move your arm down, how that transitions to relaxation. So you don't necessarily, in the MBCT approach, it's not so much going through yoga as just noticing those contrasts between movement, stillness, and getting in touch with your body, out of your head, noticing the contrast between contraction and relaxation. So it's more simplified movements. And then also along concurrently and simultaneously as the cognitive and behavioral exercises to complement awareness of the relationship between stress and pain, the relationship between our thinking patterns. So they're called unhelpful habits of mind. So we train in noticing when we're engaging in black and white thinking, so that all or nothing thinking, when we're engaging in fortune telling, my personal favorite, I'm really good at that, and other types of unhelpful patterns of mind, so that then we are getting that de-identification from our thoughts, that we're observing our thoughts, or it's sometimes called decentering or decoupling in a neurological way as well. And I could go on, but there's quite a series of activities, and I think one of the activities that I really think is something that I can teach, I actually give it to my students in classes when I'm doing, like, you get 1 hour to teach MBCT in some of the courses. And so I actually have students, one of the activities at the end is I have people write down what are they doing during the day. So from the moment you wake up, in as much detail as possible, write down every single thing that you do during a typical day. And then you have them note, of all of these activities, what's nourishing and what's depleting. Some things can be neutral, but I want you to put an N next to those things that are nourishing, a D next to those things that are depleting. And then at the end of that, you say, so what's your balance? How many, is it mostly N's or mostly D's? And then you look at, well, of those things that are depleting, how much you shift the quality. We have to wash the dishes, so some things might not be nourishing, but how do you shift them at least to being neutral so that you can shift the balance of your day? How can we perhaps schedule in some self-care activities so that then you can top up your resources? Because the idea is that, how we are spending our moments is how we're spending our hours, is how we're spending our days, our months, our year, our entire lives. And so when we tune into how we're spending the moments of our days, that's how we then mindfully and intentionally choose which direction in life we want to go, as opposed to just being driven by these habitual ways of going through our day without ever really stepping back and taking stock of, do I need to do this? Do I want to spend an hour or two scrolling through Facebook? Is that nourishing? or do I want to schedule in sometimes you want to do Facebook. You want to zone out and it's what you want to do, or some other thing. But
I like that exercise a lot. And I also like what you're saying about looking at the things that are depleting and seeing if there's something you can do to make them less depleting or more neutral. Because I think a lot of times when we think about how do I have more self-care in my life, we think about trying to stuff in extra things instead of looking at what we're doing and figuring out how do we make this easier or better or more fulfilling in some way.
And we know, one of the biggest barriers to meditation is time. People say, I just don't have time. And some people have very, very busy lives. I'm one of them. And so that's fine. So that's your life right now. And then at what moments are workable? When do you have a moment? It's maybe too much, but there was one participant who was like, the only time I get is when I go to the toilet. And I was like, great, do a 3-minute breathing space when you go there. Or at the photocopy machine, like you're standing there waiting for photocopying. Can you change the quality of that activity?
Mm-hmm. We want to thank you very much for your time to chat with us today. And it's great to hear about your really wonderful expertise in this niche area. And if folks want to learn more about your research, be in touch, check out what you're doing further, where can they find more about you or your work?
Sure. There's the University of Queensland School of Psychology website has a link to my page. People can find me there. That also has my email address there so that people can contact me that way. I must admit I have a Twitter account, but if you follow me, I'm not the best at social media. I think I've put a few tweets, but I'm trying to do better to connect that way. So you can reach me there. That's at Dr._Melissa_Day. So that's another way to approach reaching out to me and following what I do.
Great. We'll share all that information on our show notes as well. Thanks so much, Melissa. This was great.
Thank you. Take care. Lovely to meet you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks for listening today.
If you enjoyed this episode, we hope you'll hit subscribe, leave us a great rating or review, and spread the word. You can also go to noblemindpodcast.com to join our email list. You'll get a weekly behind-the-scenes message, news, announcements, and other special goodies we come up with just for you. Thanks for listening, and bye for now.